So good morning. It's Kristen Forster here, and I'm back doing a Crumbs under the table. Here with Banjo, who likes to garden on the bench. Thank you, Banjo. And if I turn the camera around, you can see Luna over there. I'm just watching out. If big dogs come when I'm sitting on the bench, she kind of tends to fend them away. She's being my beater. She's kind of looking after me and protecting me. But what we'll do is, Banjo always talks when I start talking. He doesn't understand me talking to my camera. He understands me talking to people. He doesn't like that at all when we're going on a walk. So we will start kind of heading off and wandering around, and hopefully we won't lose connection this morning. This morning my kind of verse feed popped up a verse which I'm very familiar with in Matthew. So I'm very familiar. I can't remember the reference now. It's the section in the Sermon on the Mount about not being anxious. I think. So in chapter 6, not being anxious, and because the Lord will look after. Very kind of straightforward ways. I want to really encourage you on that. This has been my and Judith's experience as well. We've never really lived lives that kind of pursued great careers, and there are certain things that we have, therefore, that are lacking that normally you'd have if you've done that. But every now and again, some odd things have happened, and so we can't, in any sense, complain about our kind of material wealth. And I don't mean because of that we're rich. What I mean is somehow the Lord's always adequately, more than adequately, quite generously and graciously done things with us. So I really do know the truth of it. It's not that those things aren't important, they are, but actually somehow we do better by trying to pursue the wisdom of God. And there are times when I've done that, where I've done it better than other times. So I'm looking back, I think, some bad choices there. Should have done it this way when we bought our house or whatever. But overall, we're living the life that feels good. Not because it's got loads and loads of stuff, but because it's a life that's full of purpose, which actually comes out of being answerable in some sense to an agency. I'm talking about God, but the trouble is I read too much philosophy and psychology, I think. To an agent that therefore gifts us meaning. I don't have to make my own. It's something that I kind of lean into and receive from him. So now I guess I'm going to have a look, see if I can walk around my usual way. Used to walk around here. They're trying to kind of encourage us not to use this way because they're going to redo this field for crops. But at the moment there's still a bit of a path, so we'll go this way. Anyway, that wasn't really what I was going to talk about. It's that anxious bit, because I regularly do feel anxious, just to be honest. Anxiety, really, of course, is fear's little brother. It's got exactly the same DNA in it as fear. Fear not, don't be anxious. Those promises are right the way through Scripture, because there are things out there to make you fearful. The problem is, of course, they then leave a residue, and we become fearful when we don't need to be. And that's something we often have to take stock of ourselves for. Say, okay, right now, in these feelings I've got, are they genuine? Are they really related to a situation I'm dealing with, or are they residue from other things? But I can't help noticing, that's just a throwaway side bit, I think, that we live in a culture now that it is, we have, in the West, we've ended up teaching our children to look at the world in ways that should make them fearful and angry, and that's a terrible combination. When we're fearful and we're angry. And just this morning, when I turned on my computer, saw on my Facebook feed someone who once upon a time was an evangelist using appalling language about a politician he disagreed with. When I say appalling language, I can totally, everything in me wanted to be sarcastic and drop a little note that said, so when did you stop following Jesus then? Because I really take seriously those words at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount when he says, And don't say raka, which means you're stupid, or fool, which strangely doesn't mean you're stupid, it means you're morally corrupt, the use of the Hebrew word. Don't say you're stupid or morally corrupt, which is exactly, I feel the temptation to do that all the time. I do it in the privacy of my own home, but actually it's not something that we're actually supposed to do. We're called by Jesus to follow his example. So why do we? And well, we do because, of course, what's happening is fear is kind of combining with anger. And so I just wanted to comment, because I'm not the first person. There'll be lots of others who have observed how observed the kind of the way in which actually school systems and universities have fed our young people with a way of looking at the world. It's guaranteed to make them feel fearful and angry, if I can put it that way. I mean, that's the thing where we look at every kind of every example of kind of an interaction of people is now seen through a filter of power, winners, losers, oppressors and victims. And we can't see the world in any other way. So we don't look at the world saying, oh, look at that situation. Someone who had no obligation to stepped in and acted kindly. Now that happens all the time. People with no obligation to be kind step in and are kind. But we don't look for that. What we look for is, let's look at this transaction and let's find a way where we can say clearly that not only are you a winner in this situation, but as a winner you're an oppressor. And the person who you beat is therefore now a victim and is oppressed. Now, I'm not saying those things don't actually happen, but the problem is that there are a couple of things. It was really interesting. I was reading a book by a Jewish rabbi recently, things that they teach their children that make them successful. Because Ashkenazi Jews are incredibly successful in every kind of measure you can look at in the world. And they do better than everybody. So I thought it was interesting to hear what they do. And they teach them out of the Bible. Some of it, as I say, for me feels a bit like wisdom of the elders. You teach as precepts of God the wisdom of the elders. But some of it you can see clearly rooted. And one of the things I really liked was his observation of things that should have eternal merit because they're personal characteristics. They make a note of the ones that have got words for them in ancient Hebrew and things that don't. Because obviously in the modern world, there was no such thing as a motorbike in ancient Hebrew, so that's part of the world of changing things. So you don't expect the motorbike to be eternal, it lasts for a season. But things that should be, i.e. moral conditions, truthfulness, faithfulness, love, all of those kinds of things. And that's an interesting question, I thought. And it's fascinating when you look at them. I won't do them all today, but two that were interesting is the concept of fairness and rights. Rights and fairness, which of course are very, very, they're the foundations of modern politics. Both left and right are all built on the concepts of fairness and rights. And what he's saying is, actually, they can both be approximations to something else. Fairness is a kind of a human level approximation to perhaps the justice of God. So I remember an American friend of mine is a church leader and missionary. He used to say, God ain't fair, but he is just. And that used to wind people up in the UK hugely. And they go, I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe you're talking about the same things. I can remember exactly that conversation going around the table. Someone, a Christian leader in the UK, being outraged because he'd say, God isn't fair. But it made me think, and I thought about it a lot before reading the book by Rabbi Lapin, as I said, where I realised actually that, see, the trouble is fairness is a kind of a human concept for us to dealing with things where we can't know the end from the beginning, whereas God knows the end from the beginning. Because fairness, it's always a shifting thing. So there's always a way to find any situation. You can, depending on how far you want to dig, you can change 10 times out of 10. I'm sure there's real evil, and I'm sure there are times where someone has an injustice done to them, but injustice is related to justice, which is a proper concept. But fairness, so I'm going to be provocative this morning, but hear me right to the end, because you'll see I'm trying to not be. I'm just saying, because you see these things done all the time. So if you're an African American male, financially you will do less, statistically, less well than if you're a European white male. So of course straight away there's an unfairness. But then it changes slightly, because if you're a black African male who gets married, you'll do better than an average white European male, but also you'll do better than a white European male who gets married and has a family. So suddenly, if you kind of dig a little bit deeper, now suddenly the who's doing financially better has changed, and you can say, oh, but there are reasons for this. But then what's interesting is that, then the same people who are asking these questions, because I've picked up this story, I've never seen this list anywhere, I've constructed it myself from reading articles by people who are outraged by something. So on the left and then on the right, as it kind of goes. But then actually even more outrageous, and this has genuinely been raised in American universities, if you're an Asian male, then you'll do better than the white males and African origin males in the States. So actually being an Asian male is suddenly, you're doing financially better. But then right at the top of the tree, of course, somebody recently realised if you are an Ashkenazi Jew male and married, all of those things, you're doing better than everybody. And I want you to hear this, because this is a serious point. And so a paper was put around in a think tank in American universities, which is actually, in terms of the oppression hierarchy, we need to really see that it's Asian men and Jewish men who sit at the top of the tree, and how do we put Jewish men at the top of the oppression tree without being accused of anti-Semitism? So that's a proper discussion going on by people who want to see the world through this dynamic of fairness, and fairness then, which then sees that there's winners, there's losers, and winners aren't just good winners, they're oppressors, and losers are victims. And the point I'm really just making is that fairness is a human level to try and approximate something which is eternal, which is justice, but we can't see it all. And if that's the way you always look at the world, and it's not that there's never a time to use fairness as a filter, but we have to recognise it not as something as eternal, but for me trying to apply the best of my abilities. And we don't actually apply any other filter, and we don't look at the world in any other way. We don't actually look at the world which doesn't say, therefore you've got all this privilege and because you're an oppressor class. And we won't look at the world which says, actually, but are you treating people better than you have to? Is there something in you that actually, bites their own pains, speaks kindly to people who aren't always kind back? Are you doing those kinds of things? Because if I look at the world through that filter, I might look at the same situation and actually come to very different conclusions. And so we have to balance multiple ways of looking at the world, not just one. And once we reduce just to one, and the reason why it becomes so dangerous is that, you see, every single one of us has a tendency to want to see ourselves as a victim somewhere. And I've often thought, why do we do that? Is because it gives me an excuse for when I haven't done so well, and it gives me someone to blame. I'll blame my parents, I'll blame my work colleagues. And in that little power struggle we had, they came out as the winner, and because they're the winner, they're obviously an oppressor, and therefore I'm obviously a victim, so I have morality on my side. Because actually the combination of fear with anger, which is the natural and almost inevitable. I think you got the gist of what I'm trying to drive at, is let's not use an excuse. We need to start seeing the world in broader ways and start looking for the love and looking for the kindness and looking for the grace of God in the actions of people, some of whom don't even acknowledge him. So in Jesus' name, help us live beyond that place of emotions that are shaped to us and fed to us by the way we see the world. Because we don't see the world the way you see it. We can't know the end.